The first talk here that I'm going to be speaking to is about free-to-play sales and this framework that I felt is pretty useful when it comes to thinking about sales, which I call TTO, targeting, timing, and offers. Now, I wanted to first start by talking about why are sales so important? And these are actually real comments from folks in the industry who I know that have talked about various applications of sales. And so first, in terms of bundle sales, there was one dev studio that mentioned, wow, I couldn't believe it. Implementing bundle sales increased revenue by 30%. Another dev studio talked about personalized targeting. This was a studio actually based out of Korea that had talked about how they implemented machine learning against timing and size of IIP, but they mentioned our implementation of our per user machine learning to adapt timing and size of IIP offers increased LTV by 30%. And then there's a games publisher based in Europe that had talked to me about how they have implemented segmentation with sales and basically saying we've mainly improved revenue performance with our partners through sales segmentation and targeting. So in terms of like the overall kind of environment that we're operating in today, I wanted to kind of point out that, you know, sort of back in 2015, if you think about kind of like the, you know, the basis of competition or how you win in 2015, it was really about having good product, capable UA, and kind of decent LiveOps. But today, I would argue that we're kind of increasingly in a more complicated and competitive industry today. And so you need a lot more things. You need great product and you need depth with the product. You need advanced sales tactics, which I'm going to talk about today. You need a deep technical infrastructure. You need kind of great UA and PM teams working together. And you need also live content and features roadmap and plan that is executed well. And so my claim is that from what I've seen in terms of alpha, in terms of, you know, kind of driving big gains, I would claim that optimizing sales is, in my opinion, the biggest driver of alpha that I know of, at least currently today. And that kind of talks to the point that increasingly the other change that we're seeing from 2015 to today is that when we think about the game in free-to-play mobile, the game is kind of the tip of the iceberg, but underneath the game, underlying it is increasingly a lot of infrastructure, data infrastructure, tools infrastructure. And so capabilities around LiveOps automation, CRM, testing facilities like A/B testing or multi-arm bandit, but there's a lot of capabilities that underlie the game that are going to be important in order to be successful. So now I wanted to talk specifically to this point around sales and this framework that I call TTO, targeting, timing, and offers. So what do I mean by this? Pretty basic. Targeting is about who do you target with different sales. So really a focus around segmentation. Timing is around when to initiate sales and offers. It used to be 2015 more about calendar and events. It's increasingly become more behavioral and predictive. And then the offers themselves, what to offer. And that has to do with things related to psychology, to how you do pricing and discounts, and how you do creatives. And so I wanted to talk about that, but kind of taking a step back and looking at the broader picture in terms of what's happening. What we've also seen from 2015 to today is kind of this shift. And the shift is from broad targeting to narrow or personalized targeting, from calendar or event-based timing to behavioral and machine learning-based timing, and from general broad offers to context-specific and very personalized, individualized offers. And so there's like this general shift from kind of broad and context-free to increasingly narrow and context-specific. So now I want to kind of dive into each of these areas in terms of targeting, timing, and offers. And I say dive in, but really, given this is going to be like a 20, 25-minute presentation, it's still going to be a little bit high level. In terms of targeting, what do we mean? And basically, the notion of targeting is really around segments, right? What groups that we target. And when you think about a segment, the segments should actually be very similar in terms of action. In other words, they should react similarly to an offer. They should be similar in terms of value, whether it's from an LTV perspective or profitability, ad views, however you've defined that value. And also in terms of needs, they should have the same needs or behave in similar ways. I also generally recommend that your segments be trackable. If this is machine learning or computer-based, you can have more, but for human beings, I would recommend having like 5 to 6 segments or fewer. And then generally your segments should also be MISI, meaning mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive. Basically meaning that if you have a player and you have different segments, that a player should generally just be sitting in one specific segment and that you've covered all of your players across all the segments that you've defined. And also taking a higher level view in terms of segmentation, there's kind of, I would say, 3 high level ways of doing segmentation. One is demographic, meaning profiles based on type of population, age, gender, location, things like that. Behavioral, which is segmentation based on user behavior, which is what I'm going to be talking about. And there's also psychographic, which is segmentation based on psychological profile. And again, the basis of what I'll be talking about in the next few slides is more focused around this behavioral segmentation. And so when I think about the types of behavioral segmentation that I've had experience in or have seen, friends in the industries run, I basically think of these 6 primary methods. And so the first that I've highlighted is what I'm calling RFM cross something. And RFM is basically a methodology that was actually developed back in the old kind of e-commerce and catalog days, but is a way of segmenting your user based upon these 3 metrics, R, F, and M. R meaning recency, F frequency, and M monetary value. And I've highlighted this because I gave a version of this presentation about a year ago, but since that time, I have actually seen data of a studio that's implemented not RFM, but what I'm calling RFM cross something, where they've taken RFM and they've taken another type of segmentation, combined them, and driven really, really incredible results. So basically like 40 to 100% increase in ARPU. There's also K-means clustering. There's also VIP regulars, which is kind of a methodology that was popularized by this guy by the name of Jeff Howe, who was the former CTO of Kabam. And when he talked about what they did on Contest of Champions, there is also sequential pattern mining, which is basically trying to determine, who your best customers or your best players in the game are. And then you write out the sequence, or you kind of track the sequence of events for those types of players, and you try to find patterns. And my guess is we'll find out when Andre talks about user journeys, but he might talk about sequential pattern mining. Machine learning, which has been increasingly being used. This is an area that I kind of rely on data scientists for, but when they talk about whether it's, random forest or genetic algorithms or things like that, these are approaches that are being used increasingly and seem to be having a lot of good performance. And finally is something that I call progression pair buckets, which is basically looking at your pair bucket groups by progression. So like a D90 pair bucket group, or whatever progression you want to use, whether it's days or levels or sessions, and then seeing how your pair buckets kind of split out based upon that progression. And so just to give you a little bit of a better understanding in terms of one of these approaches, we can talk about RFM, but with this approach, you basically want to split out your user base in terms of quintiles, meaning 20% chunks against these 3 metrics: recency, which could be days since last session, or however you want to define it. It could be days since last meaningful session, or whatever that recency is for you in your game. Frequency, and the money spent. And so as you can kind of see in the slides, when you split your player base into quintiles against those 3 metrics, then you can kind of create like a 3D graph, like this cube. And then basically what you want to do is you want to try and plot these users and then try to find clusters, right? And then based on those clusters, that should describe a cluster of similar types of players and similar types of behavior. You can also apply K-means against that to try and find specific clusters using this approach. And I do think that there are also some third-party off-the-shelf tools that actually run K-means for you. I don't think they do it against RFM, but I believe like Amplitude has a feature, I think they call it like Compass or something like that, where they also run some of these approaches for you off the shelf. All right, so that is targeting. I want to now talk about timing. And so timing is really about when should you send offers to your players. And basically, what I recommend is thinking about the types of timing that you can have for offers in your game. And then based upon each of these types of offers, think about how you would change or experiment with the type of timing that you have. And so in terms of these categories of timing, first in the upper left-hand corner, we basically want to think about general or fixed timing, meaning you start a game and there might be an LTO, a limited time offer, a starter pack. You might start a VIP promo like X days after a user has begun. You can have a weekend or monthly sale, but these are kind of like offers and sales based upon fixed timing. The other type of timing that's very traditional is basically special days. So calendar-based timing. There's holidays. There may be certain game achievements like, hey, we just hit 1 million users, or Clash Royale had their, this is our 10-year anniversary, and can have specials and offers and things like that based upon that. In the upper right-hand corner, there are also timing based upon game events or trigger-based timing. So these are usually auto-triggered. So for example, if a user gets tagged as a player that is potentially going to churn, so you've got some churn analysis running in the background, and a player gets tagged, then you can send them a re-engagement sale, for example. It could also be progression-based. So a very famous example of this is Clash Royale. You get to the next tier, arena tier, and then you're immediately offered a sale to try and help you become more competitive in that tier. There's also pre or post in-game events, pre or post offers and sales based upon game events. So like, Legendary has these like complicated events, but any game with like a big event, but you can have an offer before the event to help players try to win in that event. And finally is the type of timing that seems to be driving the most, that seems to be the most effective, which is basically running your machine learning based algorithms. And I mentioned early on, for example, you can have machine learning try to determine the best time based upon average purchase time of other players in their segment. It could be based on difficulty analysis, or you could just feed your machine learning algorithm 50 signals, 100 signals, and just have it figure out when's the best time to offer a specific player an offer or sale of some kind. And just to kind of highlight, now this is a slide I took from another presentation on Gotcha, but I just want to highlight thinking behind why it's good to offer, to give a player a sale at a certain period of time, and why the timing may be important. So for example, in Japanese Gotcha games, they have what's known as a player stress model. And so as you purchase more Gotcha in the game, the designers of the game intentionally try to drive player emotions higher or lower. And there's this notion of basically as players start to lose, that they get more frustrated. And then there's like this optimal monetization space. And so like the ideal time to monetize a player is this point where they're starting to get frustrated by difficulty, by losses or things like that, but before they get so frustrated that they leave. So in between their user monetization point and their user churn point. So this is just an example to conceptually describe why timing actually does make a difference in terms of when you might be able to send an offer and it being more successful. And finally, just some other considerations to think about with timing, but you should also factor in things like time of day, time of week, the in-app timing in the UX flow, right? So are you gonna pop up like 10 offers at the start? Are you gonna try to integrate an offer within a game flow? Availability, meaning, is the offer going to be time limited? Is a player just going to have like an hour to accept, or a day, or things like that? And then frequency, meaning like the number of offers that you're giving the player as well. So that is timing. And now I wanted to jump in and talk about offers. So the offers themselves. And so the offers is really about what are you offering? And I break it down into 4 components of the offer. The first is in terms of the items, right? So what items should be offered? Is it a single item? Is it a bundle of items? The pricing in terms of how big of an IAP is it? And so, some players, $50 for a purchase may be, maybe fine, but for other players, $50 may be too much. And so for the different segments, what is the pricing point that makes the most sense? A discount, how much of a discount do you need to offer to convert players at certain points in time? And then the creatives, which is, how you present the offer to the player. And so not having the time to go in depth in all of this, what I want to do is just kind of give you guys some of the key considerations to be thinking about when you think about each of these kind of components. And so for the items themselves, some of the things that you should be thinking about is first in terms of the progression and objectives, right? And so you want to offer items that will allow players to progress more or achieve objectives in their games. You also might want to offer items based upon events. So you have an event coming up, offering items to help them in that event. Also items around excitement. Fortnite is very famous for this, like being able to do that Marvel integration or the Ninja integration so that you're offering things to the player that they're really just going to be excited about. And then the last category I call the psychology of spend. This is something that my co-founder at the startup studio that I have talks about a lot, where he thinks about why is a player in the game? What are they trying to achieve? And then designing items around those psychological motivations for being in the game. And then the other thing just to consider in terms of the impact of the items would be also thinking about analysis in terms of, as you offer these items, what would be the impact on the economy and progression? I think this is something that in our last digital conference, we talked about with respect to, for example, Clash Royale, and then having offers and things in that game that are pushing players to the game frontier. And then also, what is the impact going to be in terms of like content pipeline? And so for a lot of, for example, cosmetics battle pass systems, there could potentially be a big impact on the development team and what the cost is going to be to deliver a battle pass, for example, that is considered valuable by the players. The next thing is pricing. Here, I have a picture of Jeff Witt here because in terms of like price obfuscation and price anchoring, this is stuff that I've completely learned from Jeff. And I think that if any of you guys follow his blog, you should probably learn more about that stuff from Jeff. But basically the thinking here is when you think about pricing, you should think about, and I'm not advocating for this, but if you do want to obfuscate the price through Gotcha or other systems, how you do your price anchoring to make users feel like they're getting a deal, how you do discovery, like understanding what that price point is. And so, for example, companies like Scopely are famous for having like step up, step down models, but I think discovery increasingly will become important as we have, for example, changes in privacy in iOS 14. And so as you're targeting players and bringing them in, you can't count on like whales anymore based upon your targeting. So I do think that discovery and figuring out the right price points for segments within your existing player base become more valuable. Another point is just understanding value versus willingness to pay. And what I mean by that is that there are certainly some games where you might want to just offer something to pay, even if it doesn't have a lot of value. And games like that are games like, MOBAs or shooters, games where players are finding a lot of entertainment and enjoyment. And if you offer them something, they'll pay for it just because they're finding value from the game itself rather than from the items. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is understanding the items that you're offering from the perspective of, is it a luxury versus substitution good? And so I think this becomes more important if we, depending upon the economic times, and if we go into like a recessionary or depressionary environment, then research has shown that if you are offering items that allow players to play more and it's more of a replacement for entertainment hours or value, then that's something that's going to continue to sell. But if it's more of a luxury good, which there's a lot of spending by whales, then that actually starts to decline in terms of purchase. And then finally, in terms of like the impact of pricing, I would actually recommend that you look at payer buckets. And this is from actually a different presentation, but I just wanted to kind of conceptually show you this notion of like, okay, as you change pricing, if you see, for example, a cluster of pay spend, then think about what that's going to do from the perspective of price times your transactions, right? So does that make sense? So if there is a high cluster of players that spend $100 in your game and you're mainly monetizing off a battle pass and you want to price it at $10, then that means you're going to have to sell 10 battle passes. But think about, for example, what the impact in terms of the number of transactions and things like that will have on your game. Okay, and then finally, discounts. So some of the things to consider with respect to discounts is really about, first, the predictability of the discount. So you don't want your discounts to be predictable. You want them to be variable and random so that players they aren't trained to just wait for the discount to come. You also want to have a limited test discount strategy. So whatever strategy you employ for your discount, like I wouldn't roll that out to your entire user base, right? Like test it with specific segments. Make sure you have a holdout or control group. And then as you discover discount strategies that work, then roll that out more. And then I do think that the use of machine learning and personalization seems to be very, very effective with respect to determining discounts that actually convert very well. And the analysis here is really about trying to understand what the LTV impact is based upon your discount, making sure that you're not having a negative LTV impact, that you're not just bringing revenue forward. And finally, I just want to talk about creatives. Creatives make a difference. This could be an entire talk in and of itself, but the point I wanted to make with creatives is that, just based on my experience, it seems like a lot of studios don't actually treat in-game shop creatives like they do ad creatives, right? So there's all this focus on kind of, top of funnel in terms of acquiring users. But again, if we have things like privacy changes in iOS 14, I would recommend you put more focus on how do you actually convert players in your game. And this isn't an offer, but you can see, for example, like in Call of Duty Mobile, the change in terms of this creative for buy premium pass from season 6 to season 7. And currently, I mean, you can tell that, just based upon that change in creatives, you can definitely imagine that that's actually converting a lot better. And so in summary, and I know I went through this very quickly, but we do have limited time here. In summary, I just want to say that basically two things. One, that I believe that using this TTO sales framework can drive a lot of alpha, a lot of additional performance in LiveOps, but also want to caution that some investment is required. And the first thing is kind of, some of you heard us speak about in the networking phase before we started the conference. First is data infrastructure, right? You need to have an analytics solution of some kind. And I do think that if that current off-the-shelf tools aren't good enough to get the visibility you'll need to properly optimize. So this will require some investment in a data structure that enables custom views, but at the same time, for example, and I'm not saying that this is the solution you should use, but I have heard of a number of studios out there using something as simple as like a Firebase plus Google BigQuery plus Periscope, which is cheap and relatively low maintenance and low upkeep. And secondly is the tools infrastructure, right? And so in order to execute on some of the capabilities and things that I've been talking about, you're gonna need a tools infrastructure capable of supporting personalization, segmentation, ability to manage hundreds of offers easily, the ability to dynamically change prices, discounts, things like that. But I would say for a game at scale, and by not hiring I don't think you need a full data science team. I mean, we can hand it over to Andre to give his thoughts on this, but I believe you can actually be pretty cost efficient by having one or two folks implement at least some of these things in a way that can help you drive performance, especially for games at scale. So anyway, that is my presentation. Please let me know what you think, and happy to talk to anyone offline about some of these practices and capabilities offline.
In the first generation of mobile, gamers came off consoles from titles like Super Mario, Warcraft, and League of Legends. Now, as we enter the era of Mobile 2.0, with 3.5 billion devices globally, gaming has mainstreamed, easy to play wherever you are, and something for everyone. The categories have proliferated. The best gaming companies in the world need deeper insights, a framework to capture the market opportunity. And now, introducing GameIQ, a revolutionary analytics product that delivers a taxonomy of genres, subgenres, and comprehensive feature analysis. Matched with App Annie's legendary market data, you have the insights to level up your performance. Designed exclusively for the rock stars of mobile.
We have one question here from Edgy Santos. How do you set the initial price of an item? Let's say you created a skin for a specific hero. How would you start pricing it? What are the things you need to consider? How to know if it is expensive or cheap? I would say that the initial price of an item, I would say that in practice, the way that's generally set is basically that's kind of like your PM or your producer just being like, well, it feels like it should be X. And then that's kind of how you start. And then you would start A/B testing that. Or if you've got better facilities in terms of like a machine learning based type of approach, then you can do that as well. But I would say that what I generally see would just be starting with a specific price and then testing different prices from there. From Troy, to quote myself from chat, I wonder if varying up sales discount will erode a player's confidence and give them an additional question to answer. Is now the best time to buy? Should I wait until tomorrow, the weekend, etc.? Yeah, I do think that the frequency and amount of timing does have an impact. And I would say that the best way to actually execute that would be through using some type of machine learning based approach, right? So for example, in Clash Royale, I've never bought anything unless I had a 5x discount on it. And I've just been trained to wait. But at the same time, I think that trying to manually figure out how much of a discount, when to offer a discount, the frequency of the discount to offer to different segments in your player base for human beings is very, very difficult. So I would try and rely on algorithms for stuff like that. Do you have any specific examples of RFM usage? So I do actually, well, let me see. So I can share with you some links in terms of RFM, but I think to actually implement it, you kind of have to figure out how to implement it yourself. There isn't like an off-the-shelf tool that does RFM as far as I know, but I will say that I have seen the data from, again, a company that has implemented an RFM segmentation strategy. They actually crossed it with another type of segmentation as well, and it has performed extremely well for them. On converting non-peers using personalization for offers, what would you say are the key elements we should be focusing on to begin with? Pricing, content, and value, timing. I would focus on value. And there's actually a really great talk by the lead on Clash of Clans, Eno, I forgot his last name, but if you go to the Supercell YouTube channel, he gives a talk where they have actually done exactly that, which is basically they've increased conversion. So basically what they've done is they've taken their player base and increased the number of players who actually spend in the game. So increasing non-payers to payers, but they've actually decreased ARPU. ARPU. So I would say that that would be, in the interest of time, that would be the best reference for you to kind of look at. But generally speaking, I would say that the best way is to increase that value. But I would say that the trick that I would recommend based upon the talk that I've given today is really to try and understand what that is for your primary segments, right? And so, value for one segment may be different from value to another. I think we'll try and hit some of these questions that were asked before, and maybe we can just open it up to anybody who wants to answer this. But one question, are there any tips to blend VIP model with regular IAP model? I think the best integration of sort of VIP or premium systems with, I would say, maybe not regular IP model, but with free models are kind of like the integrations that we're seeing a lot in terms of Battle Pass. But I don't know, is there any other thoughts in terms of VIP and blending that with regular IAP models?
Yeah, no, I would love a clarification on sort of what a VIP model is, because I do think, to your point, Joe, like Battle Passes are sort of the most recent, most successful thing that people have done. And they pretty well blend sort of reward progression with spend. I'd be surprised if there's a better implementation out there right now.
All right, from Ben Sutherland, do you have any comments or best practices on setting different prices for the same items for players in different countries? Ooh, I can't answer this. I don't know if any of you guys have a good response for this one.
I can jump on it. Okay, so yeah. I think that there are many models out there. There are many companies that are doing it, but also there are many models that you can test outside. And I think it's kind of normal to price it according to the country. You can see that also the big services, you look at, for example, Netflix or Spotify, they're even there have pricing according to your country. So I don't think that this is something that, I don't know, kind of cheating or something like that. It's need to happen. There are many out there. You can look very easily on the internet and start learning it. What are the, you have the many very known like conversion between countries. But after that, it's a long process to find the right balance that you have in each country. And it's also, end of the day, we are talking about paybacks and so on. The CAC in more cheap countries are also cheaper. So you need to find the balance which will give you the best payback with the right pricing, which will give you from one hand, the revenue, but from the other hand, you will have a conversion rate and you will have enough paying users.
Yeah. So maybe the one other way to think about this is kind of more of a, from the perspective of price discrimination. And so like, different prices, but you can deliver it through IAP, which is your highest. You can deliver it through sales. You can deliver it through Battle Pass. You can deliver it in different methods so that, again, it's the same items, but you're able to kind of fairly or perceived as fairly charge different prices for the same.
I think that when we are talking about even, especially in small product and so on, the better is to use, like, in my opinion, like one magic, like a conversion, and then to just change everything according to it. It will be much more easy, and it will be also scalable. So you will not need all the time. You need this KPI to each country, but once you have it, it's automatically change everything in your game according to it.
Next question from Mikhail Kakov. Okay, we've got someone famous here. At 2 different companies I worked at, long-term, over a year, A/B test shows that sales only changed purchase timing, but didn't influence overall LTV of the player. Just like you said in your Clash Royale example, buy only on sales. Have you seen similar results? My response to this is that if we are talking about 2015 type sales, 100%. Like, in fact, sometimes when you run sales, LTV actually reduces. But I would say that with the newer kind of approaches that I talked about, these are the types of approaches where you're actually increasing the ARPU, increasing monetization by your players. And I think one way to think about it is, I don't know if people in the audience are familiar with this notion in marketing that was recently posted about called adjacent user theory. So what I would try and do is I would try to think, and actually Andre had a really good mapping in terms of like how you could think about, I would actually try to use Andre's framework, but think about payer buckets by progression, and then think about from two different sides. Like, how can you have an adjacent payer theory? In other words, that you've got a certain type of payer and you've got a certain segment of players that are adjacent. How do you move them from one bucket to the other? You can do that through changing, you could adapt your game design, you can adapt your user experience, but on the offers and sales side, you could also try to move them in that direction through sales and offers as well. So that's how I would think about it. And just having seen the data from folks that have run different types of approaches, using segmentation, using offers, I've seen really, really, really strong results that actually increase LTV. So we're not back in 2015, in my opinion. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on that.
I think there's sort of two. I mean, there are many more than 2 ways to talk about sales, but like one is sort of to elaborate a little bit on the 2015 style of sales, right? Deep currency discounts are going to teach people to wait for deep currency discounts. Right. And if all your sales are knocking 30% off of the price of your IMP package, yeah, people are going to stop buying your base offers. That shouldn't surprise anyone. People will always seek a good deal, especially when it's their money in play. The way that you can run sales that I think are going to be more accretive to LTV is by sort of to Paul's examples from League of Legends, right? You give them these limited time offers on things that they can't get otherwise, whether that's bundle sales, whether that's these limited time objects. That creates value where you don't necessarily have it at a baseline, right? You can't get the Christmas skins in Overwatch by playing anything other than the events and buying the boxes during that event in Overwatch, right? The same is true of many other games at many other points in time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Drew, in terms of like, if you're offering stuff, are you expanding the universe of products that you're selling, or are you keeping it the same? This is kind of like you'll often see people complain about, hey, you're offering this item in Battle Pass that you already offered before. Don't do that. And so the more unique items that you offer on an LTO basis, I totally agree. You're kind of expanding the universe of the economy. All right, next question. I would love to hear your opinion about our pricing strategy. We usually give the new item bundled in an offer and we let the community decide the price. Basically, we have the ability to make the item transferable and our users start selling, trading between each other, and we decide the price based on that. Whew, I don't know what game that is. But I have seen kind of like a variation on this where it's like you design your own sales bundle. So you like throw stuff in and then you buy what you've thrown in. So I've seen that, but I don't know if any of you guys have any opinions on this one.
That's a real economy. I mean, that's Ultima, 1990 Ultima.
Okay.
I mean, the closest thing I've seen so far, right, is like poker games, right? You can make your own bundle. You can choose the size of the bundle, right? And obviously, in a true poker game, I guess you win chips. And so there is that exchange right there of the currency. As far as letting people decide, I mean, if they're deciding what the values are, I'm not seeing the incentive on optimization.
Yeah, I mean, I would just decide 0. Like
exactly, that's what I'm thinking. So now I'm trying to think, like, is there a game feature that encourages to go up? But I doubt it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I would
you saw stuff like with Artifact, right? I mean, not that Artifact is like a case study in success per se, but like it at least had something of a secondary economy where the price was both developer influenced and community influenced.
Curious, if they're letting go control of the prices of these items, hopefully there's other levers, like how many items do you need and stuff that they can control to compensate for not being able to control sort of the price they're getting for the items.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit dangerous because you don't know what the impact to the economy is going to be. But I would say a couple of things. One, you might want to like look at some of these games, and I know Liquid and Grit has some reports that talk about some of these games that do your like build your own sales bundle. So that, I think that's something interesting. And then also there are, I know a few companies use kind of machine learning, like I believe it's like Random Forest or something like that to determine what items get thrown into a bundle. So you might want to look into some of the research behind that as well. Okay, next question. Offer packs that have a very huge discount, like 300%, 500%, are these usually focused on new payer conversion? I would say for me, I don't feel like human beings are the best to figure out the frequency and the amount of discounts personally. But what I would try and do is really more around trying to figure out what your segments are, and based upon, your segments and progression of the segments, I would try a lot of different discount strategies, and based upon what seems to work, then roll that out to the broader segment. Any other thoughts on that?
I agree, and I just can add that for new user, I think it's less, by the way, less dramatically to show them that in the beginning you have like 500%, and there are many better techniques, I think, to, let's say, to get the first payment and to convert them. And yes, as you said, also segmentation, and by the segment to show exactly what is the best deal, and to know how your user react, because it's also not about all the time what is the discount, but how you present it, because you can have the like 3 exactly similar between by value of offers, but a different theme and different like way of showing it to user, and you will get a completely different result. So I think it's also a point that's very important.
Okay.
Yeah, this whole percent value add is Joseph mentioned price obfuscation in his presentation, and that sort of like value add percentages is one of the ways to do it, right? Because a player is probably not going to know, unless it's a very simple game, what 300%, what 500% means. And if you go more complicated game like an RPG, like for example, AFK Arena, when you hit a level milestone, they'll hit you with a $50 or $100 sale that says 732% with 20, faction specific gachas, lots of gems, lots of essences and other stuff. No one knows what the value of that is, because a lot of that is not sold directly in the store. It's sold limited time, but like, so you can get away with a large percentage sale values in these bundles, but don't expect, like, if you're trying to quibble between 300%, 500%, it's hard for players to know kind of what that means. So like, I can't tell you what percent you should aim for, but I don't think players could really understand that either. Higher's probably better, but it's kind of weird, and I don't think we understand, you know, what the best strategy is for those value add percentages.
Hey folks, glad you could catch this presentation. So good to have you join us. This was actually part of a larger digital conference around best practices in LiveOps. So click the link to basically get the agenda for all of the other talks that were part of this conference and links so that you can watch the other talks as part of that conference. Also, if you haven't checked it out yet, check out Appiani's GameIQ product. GameIQ is a great way to get market data on the mobile gaming market, and Appiani was a sponsor of this conference. And finally, if you want to be notified of future talks and future virtual conference events, please make sure to click subscribe to the GameMakers YouTube channel and click the bell notification so you can be notified of future events coming up. We got a lot of cool stuff coming. So stay tuned, and great to have you with us. Catch you later.